I'm very angry, you know, just mad now that I've found out all this stuff. Now, can I explain it? Can I explain the frustration? I may be just about to turn 40, but I've developed a desire, to go back to, studying and everything. Just because I'm tired of being in the situation that I'm in. I want to better myself and my circumstances, and I find myself stuck, in a rut basically, and it's getting difficult to like for instance, right now gasoline prices are really bad, really terrible, and it's driving shipping cost up and everything, and that means it's harder to do e-commerce business, which is the line of business that I'm in, on my own as a self-employed individual, and that makes everything a lot more difficult and challenging because it drives up the cost of everything, and it means being in the precarious, low income and vulnerable situation that I'm in, it makes it a lot more difficult to afford to buy even the most basic of goods, and it also makes it a lot more difficult to profit by selling to people because shipping costs are a lot higher, which eats into margins and everything, and it drives everything to the roof. So I'm under this pressure, and one thing I'm realizing is that I have trouble, in mathematics courses in college, and that's not because I'm bad at math. It's because the very structure of a classroom is fatally flawed. And it's not even the professor's fault, but I encountered this problem in high school too. So here's the problem with mathematics courses in high school, right? And it's the same problem in college, it seems. This is a very difficult subject to master. Of course, despite the difficulty, people can overcome this difficulty, and they do it all the time, very frequently. If they apply enough practice to it, they still get past it. Despite the problems, they're able to grow, they're able to get better at it. It's just a little bit of a struggle at first, so you just have to kind of stick with it, and develop that personal grit to sticking with it. And my anger really has to do with the fact that a classroom in mathematics, now a lot of people need these skills. They're very, very relevant to the economy, even at this point. And so it's needed very badly for people to do a lot of the work that's available and out there. And, one of the thoughts that I'm having is I'm trying to get into electrical engineering in order to, be able to potentially buy things on eBay and repair them, since the margins there for doing a repair can be a bit thicker, you know, and everything, because if something's broken fundamentally and there's something wrong with it, it can be very, and you know how to fix it, and refurbish it. The margins for doing and putting in that labor can be a lot higher, and that can potentially offset and overcome the potential of the higher shipping cost currently. But the thing that really appeals about it is that you know, with soldering skills, now, there's a bit of a blind spot. Now, I happen to know that industry will pay a soldering talent about $15 an hour, to do soldering work for a company. And if it's micro soldering, it's about 20. But see, the problem with that line of thinking is, and me thinking, well, I shouldn't go into electrical engineering because of that, is just, see, I'm a business owner already. I own Abraxas Industries LLC. I sell toys and, on e-commerce platforms like Amazon and everything, and eBay, and I market myself through that direction and everything. And so I'm already incorporated with the state of Oregon, and I did it that way. Even though I knew that there were structural benefits to registering in Delaware, because so many businesses do so, that, that's just a statistical fact that I know about businesses, because, the regulations are more business friendly in the state. It's true. But I'm a patriot of Oregon, and that's really what it's about. And I love my state, and so I registered my business in the state because if I did make a profit and I had to pay taxes, I wanted to pay it to the state. I wanted to contribute to this economy. I love this state. I'm from this state. I was born in this state, and I love this state and the people of this state. Not all of them, but you know, specifically the people from Washington County and from Multnomah County. You're some of the best people in the country as far as I'm concerned. Those of you that are Democrats, anyways. So, the fact is that you know, I registered my business here in the state, that I live in and I was born in, and out of patriotism, local patriotism, not patriotism for the country, but patriotism for my locale and everything. I'm quite proud of it. I mean, I live in a locale that the library levy passed on, and we raised our own taxes in order to fund our library services, because that's just the kind of people we are as voters and everything. And I'm proud of it. I'm proud of the people that I live among in my community and everything, and to be from it and to be part of it and to help make it what it is and everything. And this is more than just pride of place. It's pride of being part of the what makes Oregon Oregon. In the first place, this is the communities make the community what it happens to be. But my anger at the classroom settings is just, I'm starting to realize that it fails for a reason. I mean, you go in and you get swamped by people who need help, and then the tutoring department itself also gets swamped by people who need help. It's like there's just not enough. There's not enough hands on it to actually help and deal with these classrooms that tend to swell in size, because there's so many people who need access to it and everything, that eventually people end up drowning inside the system. They just, you know, and then on top of that, a ridiculous aspect of it, you've got the classrooms moving on a schedule, and they have to keep compliance with that schedule, you know, and so you're not able to learn at your own pace as a consequence of all this, and this is what gets sacrificed as a result of all of it. And I just didn't realize it because I wanted structure. I thought, hey, if I base my life around going to class, then at least I'll get up in the mornings and everything, and I'll go in and I'll have a reason to get up in the morning and go in and meet all this stuff. And because if I arrange my life in this way, maybe I will actually get through it. Because it was one thing when I was going to class as a student, as a kid, I was there and showing up every day, so of course I absorbed some of the stuff that I was learning and that was being taught in the classrooms. But my my malcontent is that that line of thinking is starting to collide with reality, and I'm remembering this aspect of it now. See, part of what went wrong, for me in high school, um, it wasn't supposed to happen here. I didn't think it would, not thinking ahead, in a lot of ways. So yeah, I thought, maybe even if it does, I won't have problems as long as I show up consistently. That was the whole thing that I had mentally, that I thought was going to save me from this particular problem. But no, not in practice. It didn't, And that particular frustration was the growing realization of the classroom sizes, the fact that everybody needed help with it, that we were swamped, with students that needed help. And even the academic student, tutoring department has to help multiple people who are, availing themselves of resources, and there just aren't enough tutors available to help everybody in this situation. And, mentally, I'm reaching my breaking point about all this. But this is the realization, is that just the system is so swamped and nobody can work at their own pace. They're trying, and it's not, you're not bad at math. You're not necessarily bad at math if you can't comply with their crappy, pace that is being, that they're trying to force you through in college mathematics and everything. It makes me angry, though. I mean, they put you on the conveyor belt that it is, basically, and they expect you to, to brute force your way through it. It's ridiculous, the approach that they take. And I'm starting to realize the absurdity of all of it. But when I was a child, when I was a teenager, when I got into these math courses, it wasn't that I was bad at math either back then. I mean, I got a 56% on the GED in percentile by the time that got tested. So I was good at math. It was my worst subject. But the whole, because all of my scores were a lot higher than my math scores, but even my math scores were high. But the thing is that, you know, basically the thing is that I just wasn't able to wake up on time for my classes, and I thought that would be my saving grace, because I'm older now. I don't need quite as much sleep, and the other aspect of things is just, because I'm no longer a teenager, but the classes also started later in the day and at a more reasonable hour. I mean, my math classes didn't even start until 1 p.m. So, it was like, wow, that's scheduled pretty late in the day. My Japanese courses were like what, 3 or even later than that, so I would be getting home at about 5 p.m. as a student as opposed to getting home at, like 3 o'clock and everything, and that was all fine. It was working for a while until, I ran into problems. The life intervened. Basically, it was I got into a minor fender bender. I don't blame the school or the institution for that. I got into a car accident, and the car had to be repaired, and that created a lot of challenges because the idiots that I live with didn't put me on the fucking rental contract. you know, so I wasn't able to drive the rental that time, and then the car would end up being in the shop for a lot longer than expected. And then I got sick. I started throwing up over the goddamn toilet. I didn't want to tell you guys that because that's gross, but that's what happened. I was throwing up at 3 a.m. I was waking up with a sore stomach and vomiting into my toilet, with my head over it and everything. It was not fun at all. At least, my hair was short at that point, so I didn't need somebody to hold it for me, you know. But it was painful because it was keeping me up, because what would happen in context was, I would have fallen asleep at the proper time, and then I'd wake up at about 3:30 in the morning, and I'd have a sore stomach, and indigestion related issues, and it would take about an hour for me to go from feeling nauseous to throwing up. And there's that, and so that deprives you of an hour of sleep, by which point, it's a lot harder to get back to sleep because you've been up for that long and everything. So it's just very difficult to actually comply with the schedules and go back to sleep after that point. So it's already interrupted your whole sleep cycle and everything, and pushed the whole thing forward as a consequence of all this. And that happens, and it fucked up my ability to comply with the schedules, and so it meant I stopped going to class. And at that point, my scores started to plummet, and I hated it because I wasn't having difficulty except in math with the coursework. It was all going swimmingly well. It was just that one math course that I was just drowning in and everything. Because I'm not dumb, It's like, and I'm not even bad at learning math. The problem is just math is one of those things. It's like any other skill, If we have an athlete, right? An athlete shows up and they practice 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 and practice, but this doesn't happen on the academic side of things. Everything is set up in the kind of way where it's like, if you make a mistake, you get penalized for it. That impacts your grade in the course, and this is just obscene. I mean, if like, think about video games, right? If you mess up, what happens? What does every gamer learn to do? If I don't get it the first time, if we fail the first time, well, that's okay. We can always just try again. And if that doesn't work the second time, we can give it a few more goes, and if it still doesn't work by like about try 5, then we go back and we think about it and we try something different. We try to do a different strategy, and everything, and we throw at it, and because in an RPG, for instance, it may just be bad luck, and so maybe you get it with the same strategy the second time, but by about try 5, you're thinking, this isn't just dumb, this isn't luck. In this fight, I need to try something different that breaks the boss quicker, like I was experiencing on Octopath Traveler, and it happens online in the collaborative experience and settings, but this is exactly the same. We learn exactly the same way. If you stick with trying to master a subject for long enough, you're going to master it. That's just the reality, but our system is so bad at actually getting people along the conveyor belt to actually master it, and it just keeps shuffling them forward until eventually they find themselves in a room where they're being challenged by a math class and they don't understand anything that's being put on the board. And that's just crazy, our approach is broken. And, I'm sitting here and I'm realizing this is why you drowned inside the system, too. The classroom sizes are too big. There's too many students, in a math classroom, so they all need help. They're all struggling at the same time with exactly the sort of similar issues that you're having with understanding the concept. And, I mean, do you understand this? I mean, and the thing is, you know, um, if I show you my old GED, scores and everything, and I can pull up the whole thing. Now I want you to know when I show you this that you're probably going to think, ha ha ha, you can see your address, I know where you live, you're exposing your data, thanks for helping us dox you. But unfortunately, the information fortunately for me, the information that I'm showing you that isn't cropped properly. I mean, I could do the cropping job on it. I just don't want to right now. I'm lazy and everything. And my thought about showing you this is just I don't live at this address anymore, so it doesn't really matter if the exact address that I used to live at like 20 fucking years ago. Okay, that's not gonna help you find me. But anyways, I guess I did block out. I did censor it, so hey, I've already done that work. But now if you want me to explain what it is that I want you to see on this one, now I got to save this, okay, and do some editing work on it to make you see what it is that I want. Oh, right. So here we go. We can blow this up. Okay, these were my test scores on the Florida GED, right? As you can see, there's no mismatch between it. It's my first name. I was living in Orlando at the time, and everything when this was taken back in 2004, and what was the results that I got on that GED? Now, in context, this may not impress you so much, but also consider one more bit of detail about this. It had been about 18 months since I'd studied anything, because between the date that I left, and everything, and the date that I took the test, I had to wait until I was 18. I dropped out about 17. I hadn't been in class for about, you know, a year and a half, maybe a little bit less, and everything. And I've just been blowing everything off and playing video games on my computer. I go in to the test center, I take the test, and everything, and this is how I scored. Now, when you see percentiles, right? You may not remember that from your math class, but if you get as you see about this, now that's like in language arts and reading. What is my percentile rank? 76, right? What that means in context is that only 24% of people who took this test scored higher. You know that's what it means. And that's how percentiles work. That's actually ranking people at that point. It's beginning to give them a rank. About where they are among their peers. So, so on on the social studies, right? Here I get a 90, which means only 10% of people did better on social studies. And then this is the big one. In science, and I guess I can attribute this to the fact that I like to read Scientific America. I was a big fan, and I'm a big fan of science magazines and that sort of thing. I end up pulling a 95 percentile rank. So that means that only 5% of people scored higher on science related questions. And then you get to the worst of the lot. And yet I'm still scoring better than almost everybody who took the test. I'm still above average in math, which is the 58th percentile, which means I'm doing better than, about 40, like only 42% of people are scoring higher than me, in math. That's a significant number of people, but it's not it's still beating the averages. And then it's another sky high score. So most of the scores are nowhere below, 70. And that is in language arts and writing. And I score at, 88th. So that's only 22% of people that are scoring higher. Anyways, and I just did all that math in my head, by the way. you know, I'm able to do that. I don't need to pull out a calculator to do that to know what the other, what's remaining in the percentage. But anyways, my so you see all that, right? You see the percentile ranks and everything, and that's pretty impressive. Now, I also got tested in Omaha. They tested my reading levels. Now, there's something that I need to caveat this with when I say this. There was a weird quirk in the system, right? Weird in that the way that it outputted information on their end was programmed with absurdities, grade levels that don't exist inside of it. It was Omaha, man. There's weird things in that state, and in Nebraska, there's all kinds of oddities. Anyways, in that state is a weird place. Anyways, so um, it outputted 13th basically, and what that translates to is college freshman. I'm in eighth grade. I'm getting results that indicate I already read at the skill level of a college freshman. You know, inside of it, IQ testing came out at about 144 and all this stuff. And I'm not saying all this to brag. It's just kind of matter of fact and everything about this. And this is like three sigmas above average right there in terms of score. And so of course, you've got one of somebody with extraordinary potential and everything, and I'm struggling with the math courses in college. I'm having problems. I shouldn't be having these kinds of problems because I'm clearly a fucking genius. you know but despite that, I'm drowning in algebra subjects. It sucks, because and this is the whole problem, is that, I can't get the a very limited amount of help that I need inside the system because everybody needs it at the exact same time. And the teachers just struggle to give everybody the amount of individual instruction that they need. This is not the professor's fault, really. I mean, they're swamped inside the system with student after student after student that needs help, you know. So I don't blame the professor, because he's trying his best to adapt to a broken system that expects people to learn at, the pace of the college that you're going to, and the institution's pace. And that's just not a functional way of doing instruction at all. It's not even functional, so he's trying to. The professor has the unfortunate job of trying to jam a square peg into a round hole, just like the rest of us, and it sucks. And that is ultimately why I'm trying to self-study on the Cat Academy route, because at least I can go at my own pace. But I'm angry. But despite the fact that I am pissed off, I can see the positives of being pissed off. Because while the internet has generally made videos of Tourette's guy being angry, and they've made comedy videos about it, and it's been something that they've been able to make fun of, I have looked at this one a little bit differently. From my end in things, I look at anger and I think, well, I could go and set the building on fire, but at the same time, I can take that energy and use that to stay motivated, to stay disciplined on the path of self-study. And that's what I'm trying to do. Instead of setting the building on fire, I'm trying to use the anger to motivate myself to show up every day and learn a little bit more.